Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, conference edition. In this podcast, we spotlight upcoming Cold Fusion conferences and talk to organizers, workshop trainers, and speakers to uncover all the information you and your company needs to decide what conferences and workshops to attend and what sessions you need to see. Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, conference edition. And today we're meeting with Brad Wood, Ortus Solutions consultant and trainer for his workshop at Into the Box 2020, Intro to BDD. Welcome, Brad.
Are you meeting with me or am I meeting with you?
I'm the little guy today, so it means you're the important person.
Careful, I might get a big head.
Yeah. Well, I'm not usually the little person, so that's kind of cool for a change. Anyway, so we're going to be talking to you about your workshops, Intro to BDD. So what's the workshop about, Brad?
It's about Intro to BDD, Gavin. Can't you read?
So what is BDD?
That's a good question. BDD stands for Behavior-Driven Development. It's sort of an evolution of TDD, Test-Driven Development. Doesn't quite replace it. It kind of builds on top of it. Honestly, we'll kind of start out with the workshop just talking about testing and why it's important. Because, before you get off too much in the weeds about all the different, styles of testing or types of testing, a lot of people, the biggest hurdle for them is just to actually begin testing their applications. Luis and I were at a DevNexus conference recently, and I sat in on part of a workshop that he had on TDD for Java developers. And the speaker, Venkat, had 3 rules of testing. And I forget what the third one was, but the first and second rule was just do it and just do it. That's kind of the problem, with people is getting over that hump. And one of the quotes that came out on Twitter that Venkat had said in that workshop was something along the lines of, I don't test because I have a bunch of free time. I write tests because I don't have a bunch of free time. In the time savings that you have ultimately when you have a nice test suite that goes along with an application. And it's always hard for people to kind of see that future version of themselves where they have, a nice suite of tests that, cover a lot of the functionality of the app. And all they see is kind of the immediate, version, which is, well, I would have to take longer to write tests. And so, with TDD, with test-driven development, the idea is you don't write your application and when you go back and just write some tests to verify what you did. You're kind of doing it backwards. You use the test as part of your planning phase, your design phase. When you think about, what's the function I'm building, and it might be a quote unquote, functionality of the site, maybe not a specific code function. But, what am I building? How should it behave? What are the externalities? What kind of inputs does it need? What kind of outputs do I get back? Whether that's at a very low level or at a high level, like a page. You think about those things when you're building the test, and you come across a lot of redesign, because changing of your design costs a lot more the later in the process that it occurs. So you want to find out those kind of design flaws and those bugs in the design earlier on, and writing your test up front really helps with that. So, built on top of TDD, test-driven development. By the way, I heard a joke once, which was bug-driven development, right? You just wait till you have a bug and you find it and you fix it. That's not an actual type of testing. Please don't do that. BDD, behavior-driven development, kind of builds on top of that, writing your test first. And it ties it in with kind of the agile workflows, with user stories. As a, end user, I would like to have feature A because of this business value it provides. And when you have your scenarios that you tie in with that, given these inputs, then when this action occurs, then this should be the output. And it's kind of a ubiquitous language. Luis loves to use the word ubiquitous when he does the training. That you use, that developers can understand that language from kind of a developing standpoint, but your business owners, the product owners, the business analysts, they also understand that given this, when this happens, then this is the result. So BDD is kind of a natural evolution of coming up with your user stories first, your business scenarios first, and then out of those inherently grow your unit testing suite or your integration testing suite. So reorganizing your development shop to first kind of appreciate the value and the utility of testing and the actual cost savings that you get in the long run, and then implementing that is oftentimes kind of the first step for people. So it's a really long answer to your question of what's BDD is, we're going to talk about why we test and what it does for us. And so that's where BDD kind of fits into that conversation. Because if it's just, here's some code that we already have out there, let's throw some tests at it. It's sort of like, you're only getting a fraction of the benefit. You've missed out on so much of the process had you had testing as a kind of a first-class citizen of your design phase. Now, unfortunately for a lot of people, most people, you have existing code bases you're maintaining, and you may not have any test for that code base, or maybe you have a couple tests and that's all you ever did. And in those cases, this code's already in production. The ship has sailed on starting from scratch with testing scenarios. So in those cases, you don't have a choice. You have to be able to fashion tests against an existing code base. But going forward, it's nice to have a bit better perspective. So that's what I hope that the workshop kind of gives people is just understanding how to fit it into the workflow, why it's important. A lot of times, you have developers that are okay with the idea of testing, but the management doesn't understand the reason. Wait, you want to spend more time? Why this is just going to push our deadline back? We didn't have time for this testing. It's seen as an optional step. And it really can't be seen as an optional step, or people will just skip it every time.
Okay.
Anyway.
So I think that answers the why do you think this workshop is important too. So obviously You're talking about the buy-in, the fact you have to do it and everything. So, So why do you think you're the right person to lead this workshop then? Trick question.
It sounds like a dangerous question. I like testing. It's really fun. I've given this workshop and this training quite a few times, and it's always fun to kind of see the lights turn on when you cover this kind of stuff with people. If you've this is a lot of what we're going to cover is pretty standard to our on-site trainings and our virtual trainings that we provide at Ortus. When we come in and we talk people through building applications with Coldbox, we always have a whole unit on testing that kind of covers all this right here. Now, I mentioned Coldbox. I should add that this session is not about Coldbox. In fact, we may use Coldbox in some examples, but if you're not using Coldbox, don't think this session isn't for you. This is really just about Testbox and the theory behind testing. So some of what we talk about may use some examples in Coldbox, but there's really nothing specific to Coldbox in the training.
Okay.
But anyway, I guess as far as why I should be giving it, I suppose there's a handful of people that could give it just as good as I can, but it's something I've taught quite a few times. I've done a lot of work with testing, and I think it's a really fun topic. So,
and I'm sure you've written plenty of tests in your lifetime.
I have, probably not as many as I should have.
Everyone's answer is that, yeah.
Yeah, everyone who says they're testing everything they write is probably lying. But we definitely try to place a very high priority on testing at Ortus, at least with the projects that we work on and the products that we do. So, it's one of the reasons I think it would be really fun to open source stuff like ForgeBox, is because we actually have really good test coverage on our ForgeBox site. It's kind of a shame that that's a closed source application, just because it would be a really great example of what does it look like to have integration testing that hits your entire API. But yeah, we definitely push pretty hard. Luis is like the taskmaster. He's got his whip out and he's like, write more tests. That's basically an average day at Ortus. So
yeah, pretty much. Okay, well, you mentioned one expectation for people, but like the whole Coldbox, no Coldbox thing. But what other information or expectations should you have for employees before they come? What do they need to know? What do you expect from them coming into it?
We don't have a great deal of prerequisites for this. Oftentimes, I give this sort of course in the context of a Coldbox training, but we really kind of start from scratch as far as what is Testbox? How does it work? What are the main, major pieces? If you have a familiarity with Testbox ahead of time, that would obviously be good. It'd give you a leg up. You should be familiar with just the typical closure syntax in CFML, which has been around for a while, but I realize not everybody deals with it, especially if they write a lot of tags. But the BDD style of testing uses a syntax that uses closures, sort of the anonymous functions, to help define each of the specs that we test. So if that's a syntax that isn't quite something that looks familiar to you, maybe you can brush up on what that looks like. But we'll use command box just to install Testbox and run some tests, maybe do some basic scaffolding. So if you don't have command box installed and you're planning on taking this training, it's something you want to brush up on a little bit. But we really kind of start at the beginning as far as how Testbox works and how the pieces fit together. So like I said, there's not a great deal of requirements. You certainly don't have to be using ColdBox. Like I always say, you can get a lot of value out of Testbox just in legacy code, framework one, CF wheels, any kind of application. I think you get the best experience when you use Testbox alongside a ColdBox, because we have some really sweet integrations at a low level. But if ColdBox isn't in your current stack, or maybe it's not in a bunch of your legacy stack, only in some of your newer things, don't let that be turn you away from this topic, because it's definitely more of just this is how Testbox works, and once you know that, you can kind of test anything. So
for sure. So you've mentioned a little bit, but let's go into a little more detail. So what do you think people are going to learn from this workshop?
Right. So I think first and foremost, understanding of why they should test and what they should test, maybe some information to help them convince, managers or other developers that don't see the value in it. Some of the information we cover talks about, studies that have shown hard costs and, how much more money you spend on a project that you don't test up front. Basic, understanding of how Testbox works, how to write tests. We'll cover a little bit of mocking and stubbing, not a great deal. That's a bit more advanced, and it's only a one-day workshop. But kind of just all the pieces and how they fit together. So, it is a workshop, so people will be following along building stuff. So you'll be standing up, a test suite with, some examples, and you'll get to be able to, run it from the CLI, run it from the browser, see the different outputs. And we'll talk about all the different things, your expectations, which are kind of like assertions. You can check variables to exist, check arrays to have length, check things to be true or false. All those kind of basic inner workings of building a test suite will be covered in this. And hopefully it'll, whet people's appetite such that once they, get away and they start plugging into the real apps, they'll be able to dig in and learn some of the more advanced stuff on their own.
Cool. Okay, so what do you think's your favorite part about this workshop? Is there some part you mentioned that you like seeing the light go on when they finally get it about why they should test or whatnot? But is there a favorite part of the workshop?
Probably. I usually will show people the code coverage stuff, which code coverage is a feature that requires a Fusion Reactor license. So if you don't have a Fusion Reactor license, you can't use it. But I'll usually at least demo that to people and show that it's a baked-in functionality in the Testbox. You run your test suite in a server that has Fusion Reactor, bada bing, bada boom, you get like code coverage. And I just absolutely love that feature because, first of all, like every other language in existence has it. In Cold Fusion, it took us a long time to get this. But it'll actually show you how much of your application is being hit by your unit test. So if you have a CFC with 3 methods and you only have tests written for one of those methods, you might not realize it, but the code coverage will raise a little red flag and go, oh, hey, look over here. You see the CFC? Yeah, your test ran this guy, but what about these 2 guys? They never even got tested, right? Yeah. And then you're like, oh, wow, we should probably add some tests for those. So that's probably one of my favorite parts, even though it's kind of a little side note that I like to show people. But we really love the code coverage. We've been adding that to some of our client, GitLab pipelines, calculating how much of their application is covered by the test every time we run it. And it's a really fun feature. So it's probably one of my favorite things.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's a good little summary of what to expect at the Intro to BDD Workshop at ITB2020 in May. And this is a one-day workshop, but it's available on both days. So if you pick it on the first day, you can pick something else on the second day or vice versa. So if you want to take like Eric's Intro to Quick one on the first day, you can still take Brad's Intro to BDD on the second day. So, and if you're really brave, you can take it twice.
That's right.
So workshops are available on intothebox.org. You can go register now, and we're really looking forward to a good workshop. It's always a good time to meet people and interact and make some friends. And then obviously the conference following the workshops is always a good experience. So yeah, I think that's it for you, Brad. You're free. Well, no, his workshop is not free. But but anyway, so thanks, Brad, for your time, and then I'll be interviewing you later about your sessions you'll be doing Into the Box as well.
Yeah,
so
thanks for having me on, Gavin.
Okay, have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found on conference.modernizeordie.io, where you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast player like Spotify or iTunes. We also have a link to YouTube playlist to find more videos just like this. Music from this podcast are used under a royalty-free license from sound.com and bluetreeaudio.com.